Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Tom Simmons. I am with ArchVista. We are the distributors of ModelPort. And if you're not familiar with ModelPort, it's developed by Day 8 Design. And I'm going to be taking you through today an overview of how to use ModelPort in interiors or for product objects specifically. So we're going to kind of talk about that. So we'll go ahead and get started. Also, one more thing before I do get started. If you do have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and enter those questions into the control panel. We will try and take questions at the end of the session. So here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to talk a little bit first about online sources for objects and different options you have out there, the advantages, disadvantages of those, and how those apply in terms of working with ModelPort and how ModelPort can help with the working of those objects. Then I'm going to talk about two different methods for importing objects to Archicad. One is using a direct import with ModelPort, and also how that compares with the default imports in Archicad. And then we're going to talk about those default imports in Archicad and how we can take advantage of those to help you manage objects that come in from other sources, such as SketchUp and Revit and other places that you might use. And then we're going to really take you through a lot of steps for how to really help you improve performance of your objects, how to improve the graphics and polygon count, file size, and control line weights, colors, and fill backgrounds. I'll kind of take you through all that as an example, actually product model for a manufacturer. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to first review BIM Components. BIM Components is if you're not familiar with it, it's a website that was developed by Graphisoft, a resource I should say, that has a large community database of Archicad content, some developed by Archicad users, some developed by Graphisoft, and some developed by BIMObjects and some other product developers out there specifically focused on products. And it's a really good resource. It's at BIMComponents.com. So this is very specific to Archicad. So generally, even though this is great content, we don't see as many people going to this particular resource for just product objects as we will with a lot of the ones I'm going to talk about in a second. But there are some great product objects available there from BIMObjects, because BIMObject, which I'll review in more detail in a minute, produces not only Archicad file formats, but also a wide variety of other formats as well, available like SketchUp, Revit, and others that you can use in Archicad. Now, the 3D Warehouse is a very popular resource. It's Trimble's 3D Warehouse resource that they developed, and it's I actually should say it was originally developed by Google as a 3D Warehouse before Trimble bought it up. And it really is a great resource because it has, again, both user content and manufacturer content, but they've really gone to a great length and degree, more and more I'm seeing these days, to really try to develop and provide manufacturer content. And so, but one of the things that's really important to understand, if you go to the 3D Warehouse, is there's a real variety of levels of quality. And I should say the same thing's true on the BIMComponents.com. Whenever you have users involved, you've got some users who are going to put in a lot of quality into it, and you've got others that are just going to post things because they think it's cool. And so, in this case, as you can kind of see here with this wall sconce, whoever published this, maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not, but it doesn't have a lot of high quality to it. And again, that's kind of the things that we might see in some instances within the 3D Warehouse. Now, with that said, they do have a lot of content here from manufacturers that can be very helpful. So Kohler, amongst a bunch of others, have produced these collections, and you'll actually see it when you go to their website. There's a lot of collections that are there. One thing to keep in mind about anything that you download from any site, and we'll talk about this a lot today, and that is the polygon count. This is really important whenever you're designing interiors. One of the things that we often want to do is get, these great, very highly detailed objects that have lots of information to it that really look great in 3D, but oftentimes within a BIM model can really degrade the performance because of the high polygon count of many of these objects. This one has, 22,000 polygons. If you start to add up a lot of these, it can slow down your model. So you have to be aware of that as you kind of start to look at that. But I'm going to show you today also how you can manage that as well with ModelPort. The other thing that's important to understand with 3D Warehouse is that they're offering SketchUp Object formats for your SketchUp model formats for you to download. So in this case, I could download using 2021, 2020, or 2019 model formats. But they also have the Collada file, which is a DAE model format. If you're not familiar with that, the DAE stands for Digital Asset Exchange. And it's basically an open exchange format that was developed years ago that 3D Warehouse, Trimble has now kind of adopted as their kind of open exchange format, so that if you're not using, if you're not using it for a specific SketchUp, or for SketchUp specifically, you can download it using the Collada file format, which sometimes can help you make the graphics better, or perhaps using it in a file that doesn't use SketchUp, or have a SketchUp conversion. There's some different approaches to why that would be important, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Now, BIMObject is also a great resource for you. If you've not gone to this website, it's at BIMObject.com. They really continue to really develop this. This came out of some different staff that worked at Graphisoft years ago, and they've really developed a great resource. They acquired, in fact, Autodesk, I think it's Seek was their library that they had developed, and had a huge library of manufacturer content. Well, the BIMObject crew actually acquired that, now has made that part of their database. So they've really got a very large database of Archicad content, of Revit content, and then available in a lot of other file formats. It's a great example here. Dual Flow Plus for getting your hands dry, right? These are the kind of things that you might not find as a type of object in your library of objects in Archicad, or even in some of the general libraries out there, right? And so you want something like this that's a specific manufacturer content. And you don't know what file formats you may have available. In this case, we've got a SketchUp, we've got Revit, we've got OBJ, STL, IFC, 3DS. So we've got a variety of formats here to download. Now these are Archicad though. And so I'm going to talk about how we can take these object formats, we can bring them into Archicad, and then we can manage them a little bit further as we move along here. Another great resource is Design Connected. Again, if you're dealing with interiors, one of the things that you're going to want for any type of interior design, or even if you're an architectural project and you're designing, you're obviously designing a building that has interiors, you're going to want to be able to show that in a way that is much, from a visualization standpoint, has a lot more detail to it. So Design Connected is an incredible resource. They basically have designers and interior staff that have the capabilities to design and build these models. So these are not, to clarify here, these models are not user-driven built models. All the models on Design Connected have been procured and built, much like BIMObject does the same thing. BIMObject and Design Connected both build their own objects, and based upon working with the manufacturers, and then they have people on staff that build those to great level of detail, so that they're efficient and highly and good performance with BIM models. Okay, so they're a little bit different than the sort of general resource you might find on 3D Warehouse or another 3DSky, which I'll talk about in a second. So with this one, these are incredible collections, right? Very much focused on, a sort of interiors type focus. But again, beautiful content, and will work efficiently within your model. They also offer it as free on-demand subscription options as well in terms of downloading that. They do have Archicad options for some, or I should say Archicad.gsm model options for some of these objects. And for many of them, they also have sort of the general ones like SketchUp, OBJ, and FBX are very sort of universal formats throughout all these objects. Cinema 4D and Autodesk 3ds Max. So again, you can download these, in various formats to be able to use in Archicad, and specifically with the ModelPort add-on, will give you an ability to really manage these objects as well. So I just mentioned 3DSky. So 3DSky is a CG model sharing platform. Now, what I mean by CG is computer graphics. And what I mean by that is that these are very highly detailed objects. Oftentimes, these are the types of objects that are being designed for manufacturers, not designed for architectural BIM, okay? But with that said, one of the things that they've done recently is they've started to actually offer a lot more manufacturer content on here. And so what they're doing is they're actually offering what's called an OM, or official 3D model. So it's kind of similar to what Design Connect is doing, or what BIMObject is doing, in the sense that they're trying to procure and take these types of models and make them a lot more efficient and driven by a product manufacturer. But with that said, there's still much higher detailed models, oftentimes with very high polygon counts. So you have to be kind of careful of that. But this can be a great resource if you're looking for that specific object you need, that might be much more difficult for you to model yourself, or and of course it's going to save you a lot of time. But just be aware and be careful, because some of this content can be kind of high polygon count. And in fact, you can kind of see here, here is a light from IKEA. That is a 3ds Max and OBJ, 41 megabytes just for this one object. And then same thing for this Kohler, vanity cabinet set. Again, it's a 3ds Max and FBX, but again, also 43 megabytes. It's not showing the polygon count number here, but something that you can actually manage and view within ModelPort, which I'll show you in a few minutes. And finally, of course, manufacturer objects. Now, as I mentioned, each of these different options, resources, do provide product objects from manufacturers. In some cases, they're developed by the actual content developer, i.e. Trimble or BIMObject or Design Connected. In some cases, they're developed by the manufacturer and posted on these different websites and platforms. But of course, oftentimes you go to a manufacturer website and you can then download manufacturer content from there. Again, the content's going to vary depending upon the manufacturer and the amount of work they put in to actually develop these objects. Steelcase is a great example. It's high quality as Steelcase is in terms of their furniture that they create. Their objects are actually amazingly low quality, and so again, it's just a matter of the resources that the manufacturer puts into it. Kohler has a limited number, has a lot of different objects as well, and again, they got some decent quality there, and they've got different object formats for you to download. That's going to vary depending upon the object. For the sink tap here, it's only available as an RFA Revit format. For our toilet here, we're going to have a variety of other formats. So again, this is just going to vary depending upon company to company. One of the things that we're seeing increasingly now, in fact, I'm working with Graphsoft UK right now on objects that they're trying to manage for some big project with a client. And that is that we're starting to see objects for manufacturers that are being driven by the original program they were developed with. So as an example, this is Viking. Viking developed all their object content on here, it seems like, with Rhino. And then they basically took those Rhino objects and then they just simply saved them out to the different various formats and posted them onto their website. What that means is that when you download an object here, even if it's an Archicad object, because they do have Archicad object options here, or a Revit object or a Sketchup object, these are very large, very highly complex objects with lots and lots of polygons. I mean, this one object is 177,000 polygons for just this oven. They have other objects on here that are much more complex, much larger, with several 100,000 polygons. And so it just, you really have to be careful with some of this content because it can really overload your file. And I'm going to talk about how we manage that in a second. In fact, I'm going to come back to the specific object in a few minutes, and I'm going to walk you through the steps for how to take an object that's big like this, that is becoming more common out there with a lot of manufacturers, and actually learn how to manage that. But first, what I want to do next is I want to actually take you through how to manage objects with the direct import into ModelPort. So let's first talk about that. So with ModelPort and an Archicad, we have various file format options that we can import, use to import an object, right? So if we're using Archicad out of the box, no add-ons. We've got a couple of different formats that we can use. Actually, quite a few. Revit, DWG, IFC, SketchUp, Rhino 3D, the Collada DAE I was just talking about a second ago, stereolithography, and some others as well. So these are great. They can be very helpful, obviously, in bringing other content, but they also have some issues when that content comes in, which I'll talk about in a second. And we're going to learn how we can manage that using a plugin like ModelPort for these types of options. Now, one of the things I want you to kind of think about as I kind of walk through this is that these are the sort of standard default import options, right? So we're not using these import options when we work in ModelPort. We're actually using the ModelPort import file formats that's available there through that add-on, okay? However, ModelPort D8 Design just recently, this last spring, developed a new version of ModelPort where we can now access anything that's been imported into Archicad and then bring that into ModelPort, so it doesn't have to be brought directly into ModelPort. And I'll get back to this in just a second. What we're going to do first is I'm going to talk about this direct import, okay? So what I mean by direct import is that, when you go to the ModelPort menu, if you've installed it and it's ready to go, you click Open 3D Model, okay? Or you go to the ModelPort, click the ModelPort menu, and you select Open 3D Model. That's what I mean by direct import, meaning that I'm simply going to go and I'm going to download my DAE file, or I'm going to download my OBJ or FBX file, and those are three most popular file formats, by the way. And then I'm going to click my Open 3D Model. I'm going to select it. I'm going to bring it to ModelPort and start managing it from there. That's kind of what I mean by that. So the way it works. Before I go into that, so in addition to those standard formats in Archicad, right? ModelPort's also adding in the ability to bring in OBJ and FBX. 3ds DAE are available in Archicad, but of course are also available here at ModelPort. And the ModelPort also allows you to import in Modo LXO, Lightwave LWO, Blender 3D, Alembic, ABC. Of course, AutoCAD DXF is available in both, and Stylography STL is also available in both. So these are kind of the formats that we have available directly in ModelPort. So once we select that Open 3D Model, what it's going to do is, we're going to go and select an object, right? And then we're going to, select what format we want to use for that, and then we're going to click Open. At that point, it's going to open it into ModelPort. And then if we need to clean it up, for example, user saved it with this person in here, we don't really need that person, so we just want the object of this pendant. So we delete that out of ModelPort by simply selecting all those meshes of that particular element, delete it, and now we're ready to start working with this object. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of a direct default, or excuse me, a default import options in Archicad versus the import options going through ModelPort. Okay, so what happens oftentimes when we're importing in through Archicad, let's say that DAE format or SketchUp SKP format, is oftentimes if those objects we're importing contain curved elements. So this is a good example. This is that ceiling pendant we were just reviewing, right? If it contains that those curved forms, it oftentimes ends up messy 2D and 3D type elements. So if we take a look at this, we'll actually see that in this view, right, that we've got the ModelPort DAE format, which is a pretty nice, clean graphic that was imported in. And then we have the Archicad standard format that just came in, through the defaults, where we see a lot of messy triangulation happening. And we see that both in 2D plan as well as in the 3D view. This is very common. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. And this is what ModelPort can do, is it can help you clean up some of these graphics so that they're more useful within Archicad, and as well as managing some of the other pieces I'll talk about in a second for performance. But the graphics is a huge part and an important part of what ModelPort's trying to help correct and to help you solve in terms of this issue. And this is another good example where this is a SketchUp format directly imported, and a DAE format as well, right? And the ModelPort on the right. And so, it really, can improve us on the 2D side, on the 3D side. And, when we're dealing with these SketchUp models, really, I cannot tell you how many times I've had clients, come to us and say that they're having all these messy SketchUp objects that they're importing, or DA or whatever object they're using. And it's just creating these triangulations. And it's all because of curves within the objects. And so, that's again where we're trying to clean these issues up. So ModelPort, the way it works is it has an interactive 3D window, okay? And all these views, I should say, the 3D window, the 2D elevation window below, the 2D floor plan window below, all these windows are interactive so that I can go in, I can click on an element, highlight it, I could delete it like I did before with the other element, or I could edit the materials or 2D graphics, whatever I need to do to help to update this object. So good example here too is the 2D graphics, right? Here I can select my sink, and then once I select the sink or I select the taps, I can then begin to edit the contour pin to change it from, maybe it was originally gray to black or red, or whatever color and whatever line weight I want to use. It also allows me to continue editing the object afterwards. So I've imported it in, I need to change some materials, I need to change some graphics. This is something that you can continue editing as you move forward. It's not a once import and then you have limited editing options, which is generally what happens within Archicad when we bring objects in. We'll have a few editing options, but it's limited. And if it's really a messy 2D graphic, it's just really hard to use in that regard in terms of the 2D symbol, and sometimes even in 3D view. So the next step I want to take is to kind of help you understand how to manage complex objects. So we're going to use that Viking oven that I just mentioned earlier from Viking. And so, this again is one of many objects that you can download from Viking's website. And this is the size of the object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through steps how we kind of took this object, which is a 45 megabyte object, reduced the file size by 94%, and we reduced the polygon count by 89%. Okay, and I'm going to take you through these steps so you can think about them. I know it's not going to apply to all objects. Every object is different, and it's different in the way that the manufacturer created it, and many different circumstances between them. But I think what the steps I'm going to use here, you can use in a variety of situations. First, as I mentioned before, there's two ways to import an object into ModelPort. One is the direct import. We're simply clicking on a file that we downloaded, and we're opening that directly into ModelPort. The second is we're taking a file, we're taking, let's say, a Revit or SketchUp file or an IFC file or Archicad elements, and we're going to bring those into Archicad using your standard import. So I'm going to take that Revit or SketchUp file. I'm going to go to the Archicad file menu. I'm going to import that into Archicad, and then once it's imported, I can then bring that into ModelPort to start using ModelPort to help manage that object. And so it allows us to bring those objects in. It also allows us to edit, or I should say, to manage Archicad elements as well. So things like morphs, walls, slabs, beams, roofs. Any element in Archicad also can be managed within our ModelPort environment. So how does this work? So first thing, let's say we have this object. This is a Viking object, right? Highly detailed. You can see here that this is not the kind of object typically you would use in BIM because, I mean, it's got rivets in it. It's got, it's got this, you can just see everything in this object that is, about manufacturing it, not about showing it for a simple BIM kind of approach, right? And so we're going to go take a couple steps here. First thing, after I've imported in, I want to place it, right? And then I want to convert it to a morph. Now, one thing you have to recognize, I'm sure many of you already know, is that when you take a complex element that has lots of polygons and you convert it to a morph, it's may give you a warning message saying, that when you convert to a morph, it may affect the performance of your project because it may contain lots and lots of polygons. And so this is something you might want to do, maybe not right in your project, maybe you do it in a separate file from your project, so that you can kind of edit that object first, and that way it doesn't edit or impede the performance of your project. And so you want to convert that into more so that they're editable, right? Once you do that, it's going to kind of look like this, right? And all of a sudden, it's going to take what, you can see every kind of component of that object now in sort of almost a transparent way, because they're all morphs kind of on top of each other. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to actually take the back half of this oven. So as I mentioned, we're using this for BIM, right? That back half of the oven is sitting in a cabinet. We're not going to see that. We do not need all that information on the back half of this oven. Really, the only thing we want to see is the front face of that oven for what we're going to need for BIM. So we're going to first take the back half of this oven. We're going to select it, and we're just going to delete it. Just by doing that, we've already improved our performance by probably 50, 60%, maybe 70% by deleting all that other stuff on the back end that we're not using. The next step we're going to do is we're going to draw a slab. Okay, really simple, right? We're going to go to our slab tool. We're going to define our slab to be a certain material, a certain color, a certain height, etc., for what we want to use for creating this this back half of the oven. Now, as you can see there, one, it's a lot more simple, right? We don't have all that very messy back half of our oven. And two, even more important, the performance of this is one single cube with a couple of polygons versus just, probably tens and thousands, probably over 100,000 for that back half of the oven. So a huge increase in our performance here. Next step we're going to do is we're going to select these elements, and we're going to use the import from Archicad feature in ModelPort, okay? And this is then going to bring in that Archicad, those Archicad morph elements, and it's going to import these into ModelPort, right? And we're going to define, is it going to be a global origin we're going to use or a local origin? What that means is that if it's global, it means it's using your project origin. You typically don't want to use that, but in some cases you might. Maybe if you're bringing in a very big site train model or something that you want to use ModelPort for, and you want to use that project origin for, or maybe there's some other reasons. Generally, which is why the blue local is the default, you're just using the local origin of the object, so a center point of that object versus a larger global type point. But in essence, we're just taking these elements, a slab, and the morph elements, and we're bringing those into ModelPort so we can use the ModelPort features for managing this element. Once we've done that, it now comes into ModelPort. At this point, we're in the interactive preview just like we were before with the direct import. Now we can begin to do things like edit the colors, the materials, because in this particular case, none of these Viking ovens have any material to them. They're all just white, even though we all know that if we were to put a Viking oven in, it's going to have material for the front, it's going to have material for the knobs, it's going to have material for the handles, etc. And so this allows us to now go in within ModelPort and start to edit these materials. Now, I could have in 3D window in Archicad, I could have also have created or gone to 3D and edited each individual morph element in terms of the color, okay? And that certainly would work, but it's more helpful if I can do it this way, because otherwise I'm actually having to go in and select each individual polygon of the knob, or each individual polygon of the handle, or each individual polygon of the panel. Much more cumbersome process than if these materials already have some sort of differentiation, which they did, and then I can simply go in and start to edit it using ModelPort's options to edit those individual materials. So now that we've created a new object, we can continue editing this. So next thing I want to do is I want to place it. Now, kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier with the direct import, right? When we imported in that pendant lamp or that Kohler sink cabinet vanity, in both cases, ModelPort cleaned up our object where we had a lot of curved elements, a lot of polygons, right? In terms of the 2D graphics and the 3D graphics. You'll see the same thing here. On the left-hand side was the slab and was all the morph elements, right, that are very messy. And so what happens when we select those elements and then we bring them into ModelPort, it then takes those elements and it cleans up that 2D graphic. So now when we place it into a floor plan, you can see that it's now taken all those graphics and it's turned it into a much cleaner view of that oven, right, from this top view. So now what we want to do next is I'm going to come back to that in a second in terms of how we might work with that. The next thing we want to do is we want to reduce the polygon count. So I'm going to select all the meshes in my model here. And then I'm going to select the panels that I don't want to reduce the polygon. So for example, the front panels here, I do not want to reduce those because it'll triangulate those flat surfaces. So as a strategy here with ModelPort, and I want you everyone to think about this a little bit from your own standpoint of objects that you may work with that have high polygon counts. Oftentimes there's parts of those models that have straight surfaces, they're vertical, horizontal, or sloped, that do not need to be having poly reduction, because poly reduction, what that means is that it's basically taking your polygons, let's say you've got 100,000 polygons. It's going to reduce those polygons by 70%, 50%, 20%, whatever you want to set it to. And by doing that means that it's going to kind of decimate, if you will, those polygons in there in order to reduce them so you don't have as much. That means on some of the curved surfaces, they won't look quite as cleanly curved, which for many objects doesn't matter unless you get up really close. In terms of BIM, we're usually not getting up that close. So it's okay to decimate many of those curves. As long as you're far away, you're not going to see it, right? Now, with that said, a lot of flat surfaces we don't want to have triangulated, because if we had those flat surfaces selected there, those flat panels, it would then try to also decimate or affect those polygon reductions of those flat panels, which means that that flat panel might turn into 2 or 3 or 4 polygons. And that's something we don't want to have happen. So after we select all the meshes, we can then, within our interactive window, holding our shift key, we can deselect all the panels, flat panel components we don't want to have the poly reduction applied to. So next step I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this poly reduction. So you can see decimation steps down below, and you can see there showing also that we have currently a 32.83% reduction. Now we're going to reduce that a little bit more by typing in 3. Now it's going to a decimation steps of 3, so it's reduced it to 25.6%. Or we can go back up to 32.6%. Again, both are very good. If we're happy with that, we hit freeze poly reduce geometry, and then it's going to freeze that. And then the next step we're going to do is we're going to want to update this object, so let's update it permanently with that reduction. Another important part to ModelPort is the ability to manage the file size. Now, this file, as I mentioned, came in, it was originally 45 megabytes. So a large file, and there can be even larger files out there that we downloaded from Viking as well, and of course from other manufacturers. So what ModelPort's doing in the back end is it's actually applying a compression to these objects when they come in. Assuming that you have the save mode set to ModelPort. You'll see on the right there, we have 3 options. We have ModelPort, GDL, and GDL and ModelPort. And basically the difference is that ModelPort, the format, which is the default in ModelPort, allows, basically maintains the editing options that you're doing, so you can come back and edit over time, and also maintains the compression. And so that's the best one to set it to. Now, if you want to set it so it's more universally available to anybody, not just someone has ModelPort installed on their machine, you can always set it to GDL, which would not, of course, have the compression and not have the ability to edit the object. Or you can set it to GDL and ModelPort, which kind of gives you the best of both, meaning it does compress, it does allow you for editing options, but it doesn't compress as much, which means that if you kind of add the 2, it doesn't really change the file size too much. It's really more about just maintaining the editing options. But you can see over here that this file was decreased from 45 megabytes on the original size down to 4.3 megabytes on the other side. So a huge difference between these 2 versions of the object. And so now that we've kind of got this object cleaned up, right? Was a messy graphic as a morph element before, and now it's been cleaned up as a ModelPort element on the right. The next step is really to go in and kind of edit the object in terms of pin weights, in terms of fills we might not want to have as a background. In other words, the 2D graphics. To do that, I'm going to select the object. I'm going to click MEP to open it. And then I'm going to change to my floor plan view as the top view. And this is one of the nice things about ModelPort is that we've got 3 different views here. You can only show one view if you want to. On the upper right-hand corner there, you'll see different view options where you can actually have all 3 views or just one view or 2 views. In this case, I got the top view as my floor plan view or plan view, and then I've kind of minimized the ones below so I can have a little bit more of a zoom and editing, or I should say view. I can view more detail of what I'm editing. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to select the elements I want to edit, right? So I'm going to click the back panel first, and I want to change the fill pattern, the contour, excuse me, for that first, and then I'm going to change the fill background to a gray color so it has a little bit of a shading to that, okay? Then I'm going to select my knobs, and I'm going to set those to a light gray color. I'm going to select the handle. I'm going to set that to a black color, and then I'm going to select the handle below, and I'm going to set that to a lighter gray color. So again, I've got some variation now between the different levels of elements within this by being able to select each one and being able to set my front panel, my knobs, my handles, the back casing, etc., all with different types of line weights and fill patterns as well. And complete it with any object, you click the update button that then updates it within Archicad's library, and you'll see now in our floor plan that has been updated. So what does all this mean? Let's just take a look at what we just did, okay? We started off with this object, quite a large object, very high polygon count, really messy when we converted it to a morph. We had a 94% reduction in our file size, significant. If you consider that, you got projects that have lots and lots and lots of objects, and if you've got those objects inside your file, that can really bloat your file size, or even externally, it just takes longer to load. So really important to keep these objects file sizes reduced. We also reduced the polygon count by 89%. I mean, that's huge. Considering we started out with 177,000 polygons, to now reduce it by 89% is a huge reduction in that object polygon count, and it means that now we can use this object in our BIM model, and it'll be high performance. We're not gonna have to worry about it slowing down our project anymore. We cleaned up the 2D and 3D graphics by bringing it to ModelPort, saving it, and then it automatically does that for us. We were able to edit the element, and we were able to change its pen color and fill customization to really customize the way we want it to look and plan, so that it had certain parts that would pop, certain parts that would recede in floor plan, and again, just giving us a little bit better graphics. And then finally, we were able to edit those materials, those textures, those colors in 3D to make this object look like what we want to see it in BIM, right? So when we're showing the client, it's not looking like something from a manufacturer product, where they're getting ready to go to, the manufacturing company to get it built, but instead looking like what we want to present to the client in terms of how it's going to look in their house or office or whatever it is we're working with. So again, this really was a huge step in helping us to manage a very large file size and to work with it. So hopefully that's given you a good idea. Let me tell you how to work with different objects that you might procure from various types of websites and various sources for content, manufacturer and product content. So how would you use ModelPort to demo it and to get started? So just go to our website at archivista.com/ModelPort. And on that web page, you're going to see an option on the right-hand side to download a trial. So click download trial, put your email, and it'll take you to a web page where you can then download the trial for your specific version. We do support everywhere versions from Archicad 20 up to 25. And so you can definitely find one of these versions that'll be available for you and for your Archicad version. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take questions. If again you do have any specific questions you want to ask us after today, do feel free to email us at info@archivista.com, and we'd be happy to answer questions if you don't have time to ask them now. And of course, you can always call us using our phone number at 800-522-0554.